Let's talk forests and fashion. So, according to the International Union for the Conservation of Nature, forests are home to 80% of the world's terrestrial biodiversity. Forests provide 75 to 100 billion US dollars worth of goods and services. And in this case, there's such as clean water and healthy soils. Globally, 1.6 billion people, or nearly 25% of the world's population, rely on forests for their livelihoods, many of whom are the world's poorest. Halting forest loss and promoting the restoration of forests is crucial, according to scientists, to meet the Paris Accords. Apparently, one third of the greenhouse gas emissions that need to be captured or sequestered are needed to do that by the forests. And of course, because we're talking about this today, forests and wood is connected to the fashion industry, and we're going to get into that and get into the details. So welcome to Big Closet, Small Planet, made possible by the Loudest Foundation, the Relander Foundation, and Tencel. This podcast is produced in collaboration with Eco Textile News. I'm Mike Schrager. So we're talking forest and fashion, and probably there are no two better people to dive into this topic than my guests today. We have Nicole Rycroft, who is the founder and executive director of Canopy, and Robert van de Kerkhof is the chief commercial officer at Lenzing. Welcome, both of you.
Hi, Mike. Nice to be here.
Nicole, you started Canopy. Tell us a little bit more about what Canopy does and how you go about doing it.
Sure. So Canopy is a solutions-driven environmental NGO, and we're focused on protecting the world's forests, species, climate, and helping to advance frontline community rights. And we do this by harnessing the power of the marketplace. So we work collaboratively with 750 large corporate customers of paper, packaging, and wood-based fabrics, which of course is the focus of today's conversation. We help them to develop cutting-edge environmental policies and then support them as they work over the years to implement those policies with their suppliers to ensure that the viscose and rayon or the paper-based packaging that they're buying does not originate from ancient and endangered forests or the world's high carbon and biodiverse forests, as well as to help kickstart commercial production of these game-changing next-generation solutions and actually secure on-the-ground conservation at scale. So some of our brand partners include global giants like H&M and Zara, Amazon, and pace setters like Stella McCartney.
So mainly brands, would you say? Those are the commercial partners? Do you work with the brands?
We work really heavily with brands, but then through that work, we work with them right back through their supply chain. And so we work with producers as well. So we have been working for, I think, at least 5 years now. Robert, correct me if I'm wrong, with Lenzing and many other viscose producers within the man-made cellulosic supply chain. We also work with producers on the paper and packaging side, as well as with, at the moment, probably about 25 disruptive technology entrepreneurs that have these next-generation solutions that are pre-commercial at this point, but we anticipate over the course of the next 2 to 3 years will be kind of on the scene at scale.
Okay, we're going to get into that. How do you fund your work? Is this something that the brands have membership fees to, or are you supported by other grants and foundations?
So we do work closely with brands and producers as part of our model of change, but we don't enter into financial relationships with any of the brands or producers that we work with. So we're funded 100% by philanthropic foundations, by individual donors who share our passion for a stable climate and vibrant biodiversity, and to like our model of change and our track record.
I was also curious, you talked about passion. You started the organization a bunch of years ago, and you've gotten a numerous award. And are you surfing these days?
Yeah, I am surfing whenever I can, and I'm a displaced Aussie. I live in Canada. I live on the west coast in Canada, but I'm from Australia originally. I'm not really sure why I waited till I moved to a cold climate country to really sort of embrace and take on surfing as one of my passions in life. But there you go. My wetsuit is my friend.
Robert, are you surfing at all these days?
No, not these days anymore. When I was still living in the Netherlands, I was a very fanatic windsurfer at that time. But then when I moved to Switzerland, the opportunities reduced. And then I'm now much closer to the mountains and nature that the Swiss and the Austrian Alps are offering me. So completely different, but still passionate at least watching it.
I told my wife when I was courting her, so to speak, that's a 1950s expression, but that I was a surfer from the New Jersey shore, which isn't known for its waves. And it seemed to get her, and it took her about 20 years to realize I actually didn't do much surfing. So, in any event, so Robert, tell us about your role at Lenzing.
So I joined Lenzing back in 2014. I was passionate about just the foundation of the company because the whole concept of converting CO2 and sunlight into then highly emotional, functional, and aesthetic products like fashion or non-wovens was something that really appealed to me. I've been in the fiber industry now for about 30 years, and I have to admit I was a bit of a tree hugger, so I was a little bit more skeptical when I joined Lenzing. And then, of course, when I met with our wood people internally, when I then saw what kind of policies we have, but also then proactively reaching out really to Canopy to really make sure that we're doing the right things right. That was my philosophy of really having to be confronted with NGOs because they are the mirror for you. That really showed me that we are on the right track. Lenzing at this moment, roughly 70% of our business is coming actually from the fashion industry, or fashion/textile. So it's home textiles is also part of that. So 30% is coming from non-woven applications. That could be baby wipes and facial masks. And then we got some real small little technical applications that are also growing, like battery separators for lithium ionide batteries, for instance, for electrical cars. But that, of course, is very high tech and low volume products. It just shows you the potential that these wood-based cellulosic products actually still have for further growth.
So let's give our listeners just a little bit background because we're going to get into details of policy and criteria and next generation solutions. But can maybe Nicole you start if you remind the listeners the basics like how does clothing, fashion, textiles, what does it have to do with forests? How much of our clothing is made from uh, wood-based fibers? How much is it made from endangered? Give us some facts there.
Sure. So it's not an intuitive link. So it's not surprising if people may not know that viscose and rayon and modal, those kind of man made cellulosic fabrics, soft and silky next to your skin, actually originate from tree fiber. So trees that stand up to 100 feet tall in a forest that can give you a splinter go through kind of like a series of processes, chemical processes that end up manufacturing them into these fabrics that are now increasingly being used in the fashion industry. And there are, in fact, 200 million trees that disappear into man made cellulosic fabrics every year. It's slated to double within the next decade. And there's approximately just under a third of the fiber for viscose fabrics is now originating from ancient and endangered forests. And we've been working with brands over the last 7 years and with leading viscose producers over the last 5 to 6 years. And we've seen some really significant shifts through this supply chain. So I'm sure Robert can give more in terms of industry stats, but this kind of family of fabrics is currently the third largest kind of group of fabrics that is used in fashion and clothing.
And Robert, you can jump in, and if there's any stats you want to emphasize in terms of maybe its potential growth in the future, this market, I'd be interested in that. But just to build on what Nicole said, the process to turn, sort of wood pulp into clothing, how does that work? And I guess, Lenzing argues that it has a process that's much more environmentally friendly compared to the traditional processes. Am I right?
Yeah, I think so taking a step back and looking at the overall fibers industry, I think the way how we look at the industry, the fiber industry is overall 110 million tons of fibers produced. That going into all applications, and that includes all fiber types, from carbon fiber to glass fiber. And close to 7 million tons are then the wood-based cellulosic fibers. Now, the other big natural fiber category is cotton, of course, with roughly 26 million tons. And then the remaining are all synthetic fibers. Now, when you look at the growth rate, and Nicole said it's going to double, I think that's definitely true. If you look at the growth rate that this wood-based cellulosic fiber industry in the last few years has seen, has been really almost double overall GDP growth. So it's really around the 6 to 8%. Now, part of that is driven by the very good functionality. It's a great blending partner. It can be blended with the polyester fibers. Have this polyester viscose fabrics that you see a lot. But there's also, of course, a better alternative than, for instance, a cotton fiber, because per ton it has much less water consumption. It uses significantly less, if any, pesticides. So there's a sustainability story, really, why the wood-based cellulosic fibers are better than cotton. Now, if it's a good fiber or not is not just the wood source. It's also, like you mentioned, it's the way how you then convert this wood into a fiber. Now, if you come to the Lenzing site in Austria, you see trainloads of wood coming in. And then the first step that happens is that the wood is being shredded into smaller pieces, and then it's being cooked into an acid. So during that cooking process, actually you separate the cellulosic from the resin and from the crust. So in principle, you have three product categories that really come out of this, and it's 100% natural. So 40% of it is cellulosic that then afterwards can be dissolved and can be spun into a fiber. Roughly 40% is what we then describe as black liquor. It's really the waste that is that is in the tree, the crust, etc., that has very high energy value, but very small manufacturing value. So that is currently being used as biomass, and it's an extremely critical resource for green energy. And then the remaining 20% is then going into co-products as we describe them. So, for instance, the acid that is being used to cook in the wood and is a bit of a blend, and also with the resin, can be used to conserve little onions or pickles, and is being used in the food industry. So if you buy little onions from the glass and it's coming in an acid, it could very well be one of our co-products. So what happens is 100% of the wood that is coming in is being really converted into high-value applications, 40% of it then being the fiber. Now, all the chemicals that are being used, indeed, we've invested a lot in the last few years in emission reduction technologies, be it air or water. So if you look at a Lenzing facility, we have a wastewater treatment facility equal to about 1 million plus people city. And at the same time, we've invested a lot in the closed loop production processes. So if you look at a production process like, for instance, lyocell, 99.9% of the chemicals that are being used to convert this pulp into a fiber can be reused. So it's really a closed loop production process, making it therefore one of the most sustainable fibers in the world.
Okay, so I know that our listeners, it's fascinating to know how you all do it at Lenzing, and you already have this reputation, and we'll talk about ways that you can do even better. But traditional viscose is made in a much more worse way, right, Nicole? I mean, my understanding is that it can be a lot of the wood is not used. There's a lot of chemicals that are terrible for the environment, and so a classic viscose process can be quite harmful. Is that right?
Yeah, I mean, Lenzing are known within the sector as for their environmental leadership, both in terms of them developing the cleaner and closed loop chemical processing, the lyocell process, now many years ago, as well as the work that they've been doing with us over the last 6 years around their wood sourcing. But definitely there are many other viscose producers globally who are not as efficient with the yield that they get from their mills, B, not as clean in terms of their pulping technology, and C, are definitely sourcing from high carbon and biodiverse forest landscapes that are of concern. So, as with any supply chain, there are leaders, and then there are those that are lagging.
Right. So, what about this forest thing? Because you're talking about specifically endangered forests, and there's that's a very specific area. Is that your mission specifically, just protecting endangered forests, and why is that so important?
Well, I mean, forests are amazing. There was something that Robert said in his opening that made me think about how it is kind of incredible that they basically eat light and carbon dioxide and give us clean oxygen. They stabilize our climate. Forests are absolutely critical for life on Earth. As you mentioned, Mike, at the top of this segment, forests represent 30% of the climate solution. There's a reason that they're called the lungs of our planet. They're home to 80% of the terrestrial biodiversity that we share this planet with. And because of the loss of forest ecosystems, we now share this planet with 68% less animals than we did when I grew up as a kid in the 70s. They play a critical role in precipitation cycles as a biotic pump, kind of drawing moisture across continents. And so, conserving forests is good for our planet and therefore good for us. But also, I think, especially in 2020, there's been heightened scrutiny on the role of forests in protecting us from viruses and diseases. And the UN has found that 75% of new diseases are now crossing the zoonotic barrier, or from animals to humans. And so when we log these intact forest areas, we're unleashing pathogens that we have absolutely no resistance to. Ebola, SARS, MERS, COVID-19, they all have crossed the zoonotic barrier. And when we disturb these critical intact forest landscapes, we're imperiling our own survival and health, not just the species that have resided within them. So they're kind of a critical support system. So conserving forests is critical not just for the health of the planet, but also for humanity. And the scientific community are very clear that if we are going to stabilize our climate, and if we are going to stop this precipitous decline in biodiversity, then we need to be conserving 30 to 50% of the world's forests, with a particular emphasis and focus on those forests that are still habitat for endangered or threatened species, and for forests that have particularly high carbon values. So the forests that are still old growth or primary forests, they need to be largely conserved as they are intact, and that there does need to be restoration, fairly extensive restoration efforts on some of the critical landscapes.
We need a forest, be it for fresh water, be it just for the overall oxygen that we have. But it's also such an important factor indeed to avoid the erosion that is happening. The whole world with the climate change is exposed to significantly more floodings, to more storms. These are issues that will become just bigger in the future if the land is not protected, and that's why you need the trees. And therefore, I think besides, and she mentioned it clear, I think besides what Canopy Style is really doing is really protecting the endangered forest. It's also really putting a lot of emphasis or need and maybe pressure even on industry players to actually invest in reforestation. I think that is the right thing to do. We really need to think in the concept when it comes down to forestry. And if you look at how fast we have been destroying forests in the last decades, we really need to take this kind of net positive approach that we just need to do more than what we take out. It's not good enough to just maintain and protect what we have. But as industry leaders, we need to go beyond it, and we need to actually regenerate, forestry globally in all parts of the world to protect the environment, to protect the well-being, to protect specifically the biodiversity. So that's why I think the initiative of Canopy as such is very good, and I also really appreciate that they go beyond just as you described protecting endangered forests.
So we're going to get into the reports, Nicole and Robert, because there's some good stuff in there. I just wanted to ask a then general question. We know that the textiles industry and the fashion industry is growing. We know that a significant percentage of the fibers used for textiles and clothing comes from wood-based fibers, and the demand for fibers is only going to increase. We know that. So how are we doing when it comes to protecting forests and in relation to the demand and the dynamics that are set in motion because of the textiles and fashion industries need for fibers? How are we doing, Nicole? Are we doing okay? Are we managing our impacts? Are we doing poorly? How would you rate the industry?
Well, we're doing a lot better now than we were 7 years ago. So fashion is a big user of forest fiber. We've been talking for the last 15 minutes or so around viscose fabrics and the 200 million trees that go into that annually, and the work that Canopy has been doing with our Canopy Style initiative is really focused on, okay, how do we ensure that the 200 million trees that are going into viscose and rayon fabrics at the moment, today, don't come from these really critical high carbon biodiverse forest landscapes? And then, given that it's going to double within the next decade, how do we ensure that the new production capacity that producers like Lenzing are looking to bring online in the next 12 months to 5 years to meet their fiber needs? How do we ensure that they're not going into forest landscapes that would be absolutely disastrous, like into the middle of the Amazon or into Indonesia's peatlands or the boreal forest? How do we ensure that those are, in the interim, sited in places where they're not going to be drawing from forests that have high biological value, and ideally within the next 12 to 18 months that they're actually relying on these alternative feedstocks that have fundamentally lower footprints, like waste textiles or agricultural residues, taking the pressure off trees and forests altogether.
So if 10 was like we're doing great, we've achieved it, and one is it's terrible, where do you think we're at?
How about I give it to you between 0 and 100? So we've been working within the viscose supply chain for the last 7 years, and we've gone from 0 ability to state that there weren't ancient and endangered forest fiber within viscose fabric to now 52. So we've gone, I'd say, 52% of global viscose production is now verified as being at low risk or has been assessed with a green shirt in Canopy's hot button ranking. So
Okay.
maybe that's a bit of a teaser on the next part of the
Yeah,
conversation you're
a
wanting to
nice,
have.
very nice segue. Very good. But Robert, I want to ask you also. I don't know if you want to use a 100-point scale, but given your your position in the market? How well do you think the industry is doing?
I think if I look at the overall industry, I would give it a 4 out of 10. And the key issue for me is transparency. I think in one of your previous podcasts, Michael, you talked about some of the misfacts in fashion, and that is for me just also in this area a big uncertainty. If I now listen to Nicole, and she probably knows her numbers, of course, much better with than the 200 million trees. Hard for me to judge, but I also think it's important that we then look at what kind of wood sources do we have, where do these trees come from. Now, my numbers indicate that only about 1% actually goes, and of all the wood that is being used ends up in fashion. Construction, furniture, paper, packaging are significantly bigger industries, and the overall fashion industry is a very small portion. And doesn't make it less important, don't get me wrong. It's not that I'm saying, look, don't focus on fashion. I think it's extremely important. But then if you look at the wood sources, the number one for me is that it's really responsible wood sourcing. And we've, I think, seen that well-managed forests are actually growing. If I look at Central Europe, a lot of the well-managed forests are now bigger than they were 20 years ago. And then if I look at some of the other industry sectors that I described, like construction of furniture, these are industries, they really need big trees and they need big pieces of wood, for their purpose. If I look at then some of the forests, some of the wood supply that we have in Central Europe from managed forests, and very often they might be state-owned forests. It's a lot of wood is coming from the thinning of the forest. You need to thin the forest. You take some of the smaller trees out that are not appropriate for construction or for furniture, but are highly suitable for our application, because we do not need the big solid wood blocks. We can also use the smaller branches.
Okay, so let's Nicole, you released the hot button report again. Tell us what that is and how it's helping. What do you use the report to do?
Sure. So the hot button is essentially the go-to resource for the 320 Canopy style brand partners that we work with. All of those companies have developed and are implementing policies that will, see them eliminating any viscose fabrics that originate from ancient and endangered forests, B, supporting the development and commercial adoption of these next generation solution or alternative fiber fabrics. And thirdly, or C, working together with us and with their peers and suppliers to advance on the ground conservation at scale. And so the hot button is essentially it's a report that assesses 31 viscose producers across 26 different environmental criteria. And the key criteria are basically around whether a viscose producer is sourcing from ancient and endangered forests, where they're on in their trajectory of developing commercial scale next generation solution fabrics, traceability and transparency, the advancement of large scale conservation. And this year, for the very first time, we have, as part of our partnership with ZDHC, which is another NGO that works within the apparel space, and they're focused on chemical and chemical production and pollution issues, we do have chemical processing integrated into the hot button. And so basically what it is, it provides a quick one-stop shop for brands who are obviously really busy, for them to be able to assess who are the viscose producers that are going to be the best partners for them in helping them as a brand meet their own carbon and sustainability goals.
And so the ones that you assess, the viscose producers, are they? I guess I would hazard a guess they're not all of the viscose producers out there, are they? Or how did you decide which ones to assess and which ones not to include?
So we cover a lot of global production within the tool. So we have the largest in the industry, right down to suppliers that represent 0.2% of global viscose production. But within the Canopy Style initiative overall, we have viscose producers that represent 90% of global viscose production, formally committed to Canopy Style, so committed to eliminating the use of ancient and endangered forest fiber, transitioning to next generation solutions, and to helping conserve large scale forest conservation. Now, producers are at different sort of points of implementing those policies. Of course, implementation is always kind of more challenging than developing a commitment. But we have seen incredible change in this supply chain in the last 5 years since we
So you
published our
said
first hot button.
90% of the viscose producers are connected to Canopy. Is that what you said? Or did I
Viscose producers
misunderstand?
that represent 90% of global production. Yes.
Okay. Okay. Well,
So
that's
we're
very important. Very impressive.
and
Um,
and 52% of global viscose is now verified as low risk of being sourced from ancient and endangered forest, or has been attributed a green shirt within the hot button. So the hot button ranking has both a points system as well as a color coding. So green meaning that those producers are low risk of sourcing from ancient and endangered forests, and are showing sort of really strong performance across other criteria. And red, obviously, indicating that there is a direct link to sourcing from a high carbon or a high biodiversity landscape, or from socially controversial areas. And so we've seen a phenomenal shift in this supply chain. Like, it's literally transforming in real time. And I think that's exactly the scale and the pace of change that our planet needs. And it's a testament to the engagement and leadership of our brand partners, as well as the leadership of viscose producers. Lenzing and Aditya, an Indian-based producer, both achieved dark green shirts in this year's hot button, and that's a first.
are there any viscose producers that get sort of red where they're like, do not engage with these? Is there anyone that says these are so poor performers, you should not be working with them?
There are a number of producers that still have red in their shirt. In fact, 48% of global production still has red in that
Okay.
shirt, and so that's all still part of the work that lies ahead for Canopy
Yep.
and our brand partners.
And that percentage, does that represent a significant portion of the viscose producers today?
So 52% of global viscose production now has a green shirt, and 48% of all the viscose that is produced globally still has red in its shirt, or still has links to or is originating from high carbon landscapes.
Okay, thanks for spelling that out. I guess I should have done the math there.
That's okay.
Yeah.
It's late in the day after a long week.
That is true. That is true. A long couple weeks. Yes. Okay. So I was just curious because congratulations on getting a great score, Robert. I did see that you were not the number one, so I have to go after you on this one. What is
I
it that would
such a
get?
troublemaker, Mike.
Yeah, I mean, come on. What is it that? Because this is where the nuances come in. What is it that would get someone to go from number two to number one? What is it that you still need to work on?
I think, well, first of all, it's not necessarily our objective to be number one. I think the categorization of Canopy in the color coding, I think it's to be dark green, we're very proud of, and I think that's also really what I want to thank my team for heavily investing in achieving all these other points. I'm also extremely pleased to see that the industry is following. When we had the first meetings with Canopy, there was a long journey ahead of us and required a lot of work, quite a lot of investments. And of course, then the question is, do you get a return on these kind of investments? And I think the success that Canopy Star has had with the brands and retailers that are committing to only buy from from green shirts encourages companies to go and invest and do the right thing when it comes down to wood sourcing. So I think from that perspective, a great compliment to the achievement. 52%. I think in a period of 7 years is something successful. You got a momentum going that will stay. Now the criteria continues to evolve, and there is a system on how to give points. And I think if I look at in the last few years where Lenzing has remained short, and I think if you look at then the individual points, Biela did a great job, and in many areas we scored the same amount of points. If you look at what makes a difference between our number one and number two, it's all around this conservation topic that has increased in importance in the last few years. And the way how Canopy is encouraging these conservation initiatives is that companies are able to get points by investing in conservation in certain areas of the world. And that is, of course, very difficult for Lenzing because we've historically always been trying to shy away from those parts of the world. I mean, I'm talking here about specific areas like Indonesia, or Canada, where we've never sourced from, and I think that makes it therefore also more difficult to invest. So, if I say it a little bit bluntly, I mean the fact that you've created a mess in the past and now you clean up your mess allows you to get additional points. So, and as we have not created a mess, we don't get these additional points. Well, fine, those are the rules of the game, but therefore, it's not that I want now to actually strive for being number one in this current environment. At the same time, also because I really think as Lenzing we are fully committed to conservation. We do support all the initiatives that Canopy has by sending letters to the government, etc., to really also make sure that the role of the government is being recognized in this whole initiative. So we definitely support there. Now we've decided to stay a little bit closer to home with complete reforestation initiatives in Albania. That is closer to home from a European perspective. But we miss out on a point there because this kind of reinvestment and reforestation, and if you look at that area, it's heavily affected by the degradation of the soil that we hope to then recover with the reforestation we're doing there. But
let me just jump in there, Nicole. How do you see this criteria and what Robert says?
Well, I think that there's a level of fairness in how Robert's described. Lenzing don't currently have a heavy footprint, or have direct tenures in a high carbon or endangered species forest area. And so they're not in the same kind of in the same position to be able to directly advance conservation in a region. And I would say that, part of why Lenzing does have a dark green shirt is because of the leadership that they have been taking, not only on the raw material sourcing, and they've taken, significant steps in that area that I think are really noteworthy, but also around next generation solutions development. And so I feel like that's part of why they have a dark green shirt. And I see that that's an area where with continued leadership that they could, I think, Mike, if your question is really sort of to be a provocateur around how can Lenzing be number one, even though I heard Robert say that that's not necessarily what they're aspiring towards, I would see that that's the area where Lenzing can really continue to lead,
in the next generation piece.
In the next generation solutions piece.
So I want to get into that because I want to get into this other report you released. But I'm thinking also generally about conservation. And given that we have such little time to save and reduce carbon, our greenhouse gases, and forests play such a crucial role, often I wonder, when we spend all this time working on individual companies' supply chains. And in your case, the mechanism seems to be working because they're moving the market demand and requiring that viscose producers do something else. So that makes a lot of sense to me. But we also need to just go out, I think, and tell me if I'm wrong, just protect these forests in general, not necessarily making sure that it's always a market mechanism that does that. So, for instance, not just a Lenzing, but a Zara, or I mean, we're spending money in greening our supply chains. But what if we took that same money and tried to work on conservation so the forests immediately are protected and we don't wait 10, 15 years to get our supply chain greened? So I wonder how you see that, Nicole, because uh, if we're waiting for the whole market to shift and we have such little time, how should we best spend our money?
Yeah, I think it can't be I would go more for an improv approach here where it's yes and. I don't think we can have it be an A or B. I think it has to be A and B. We need to be investing in securing large scale conservation with the kind of urgency that you're just speaking about, Mike, as well as greening supply chains, because the the challenge for forest conservation at the moment is that we rely on them for so many things. Like the fashion industry, yes, it has a direct link to forest ecosystems through viscose, but it's also, some brands use more forest fiber in the packaging that they have within their businesses than they do within the fabrics that they have within their businesses. And then there's leather, which is, not a direct forest product, but is as the result of areas being deforested and cleared, both for grazing as well as for the growing of grain. And so, you have construction materials, packaging, paper, fabrics. It's just this accumulated load on forest ecosystems to provide the fiber for all of these products. And so, if we don't actually transform these supply chains, the pressure on those forest ecosystems to provide the fiber for the goods that our societies depend on and kind of revolve around or have as integrated parts of kind of the workings of businesses and daily life, we will not successfully actually hit the conservation targets that we need. And for most companies, most brands, most of their environmental footprint, their biodiversity and their carbon footprints are not actually at the retail level. It is back linked to sort of the kind of tier 4, right back through their supply chain at the production level and where the raw materials are coming from.
Well said. So let's get into the report, the other report. So you have your hot button report that was just released. And then early in the year, right, you released a report on what you're calling next generation solutions, or I think it was, what's it, a survival guide? There was some
That's
fun
right.
name.
Survival, a pulp thriller, because
Right.
this next decade is going to be a cliffhanger, we think.
Oh, that's very good. And you released it at the World Economic Forum. But what was that report? What was the intention of the report? What were some of the key conclusions?
Sure. So actually, with survival, we started with the science. The scientific community is saying that we need to protect 30 to 50% of the world's forests by 2030. Like, that is a huge stretch from where we are today. But that's what the scientific community is saying that we need to do to hit the climate targets that we need to be hitting, as well as to prevent this precipitous loss of biodiversity that we're experiencing. And so, with that as the target, it's like, okay, to achieve that scale of conservation, then we need to use significantly less forest fiber over this next decade to make the myriad of products that we've been talking about this morning. And so survival is really an action plan or a roadmap of how we can use 50% less forest fiber and replace it with alternatives that have fundamentally lighter carbon and biodiversity footprints. So we can make textiles out of waste textiles rather than those textiles. Most people's clothing 85% of clothing ends up in landfill. And so rather than it degrading into methane, that can be used for next season styles. We can use agricultural residues like straw left over after the food grain harvest. Some of those can also be integrated into fabric manufacturing. They also make excellent papers and packaging. And then there's this cool, crazy science of growing microbial cellulose on food waste. And so essentially what we did was we looked at where the fiber was available and then where the mills would need to be built, and basically mapped out the infrastructure transition that would be required over the course of the next 10 years to take us from where we currently are, which is relying too much on forest ecosystems to provide fiber when we need forest ecosystems to be help sustaining the life support systems that we depend on, to a diversified fiber basket, which has sustainable forestry as part of it, but just as a much smaller part of the pie, and that the industry is using alternative fiber sources. And so it's really about transitioning many of these supply chains from being forest products supply chains to being fiber supply chains.
So you think that given the analysis, that the key to all this is these new innovative solutions. So we're talking things like Renew Cell or Orange Fibers, or am I speaking correctly? Those kinds of solutions.
Yeah, I think diversifying the fiber basket is really critical.
But I'm thinking about, you say next generation solution. What is a next generation solution?
So a next generation solution is a technology that can use, rather than using trees, can use waste textiles and make it into the fiber that fashion brands can then integrate and incorporate into next season styles. So yes, like a Renew Cell, or in North America, the very first modern day straw pulp mill is now up and operating, and it produces a pulp that is being integrated into packaging. So it's called Columbia pulp. So it would be like a Renew Cell or a Columbia Avenue Titan. There are a Nanolose, which uses a microbial cellulosic technology. There are a lot of disruptive technology entrepreneurs that are out there. Of course, not all of them are going to be successful at scale. And so that's part of the work that Canopy is doing, both with those technology entrepreneurs as well as with brands and with producers like Lenzing, as they start to work with, both their in-house R&D teams as well as with some of these disruptive technology entrepreneurs, these next-gen solutions providers, to see, which one of these technologies are really going to work at scale.
And then I saw a number. You put was it 69 billion or something like that? What does that number refer to?
Yeah, so we, as part of Survival, which folks can find on the Canopy website, canopyplanet.org, we mapped out, okay, here's where the fiber is available, these alternative sources of fiber. There's 92 million tons of straw that's left over every year in India. Much of that is burnt, and 40% of the particulate matter that Delhi had earlier this year, and it was a particularly bad pollution year, 40% of that comes from farmers burning their straw just because they have to get it off their field. And so, we mapped out, okay, there's a concentration of agricultural residue in India that, we could cite 40 mills there without degrading or undermining the organic integrity of the soil. But with that map, that global map of, okay, here's where these new mills go, obviously that takes money to build those new commercial facilities. And so $69 billion is what we estimate the investment price tag to be for this new green infrastructure, which sounds like a lot of money. It's more than what I have in my bank account, maybe all three of us combined. But when that's spread out over 10 years, and you consider that in 2018, the company that sells Botox sold for $68 billion, then an extra $1 billion on top of that to save the planet seems like a pretty good deal.
So, Robert, have you read the report?
Yes, of course. First of all, I think it's very good that Canopy comes out with a vision statement. I think that is very good, and I also, by the way, like the title "Survival." So, from that perspective, again, this is a topic, and don't misinterpret. By the way, Nicole, when I said I don't strive to be number one, my full commitment to sustainability is to do the right thing even when nobody is looking. But indeed, it needs to be just considered into the context of other investment, like Michael said. And, I think the wood sourcing is extremely important for us. But now you're also touching already a little bit with the straw example. For instance, biorefinery for us is extremely important because we are one of the very first fiber producers to have really committed to science-based targets and are really committed to reduce the amount of CO2 emissions. And that means that we're making significant investments in, for instance, moving away from coal and looking at alternatives, to coal, such as natural gas, but of course also biomass. And I think those are the kind of things that we need to, as companies, we need to look at to really have a positive impact on the total environmental issue we're confronted with.
So, do you think, though, if you look at a macro perspective on the way forward, Canopy has said this is what's needed. We need to invest in these kinds of solutions. We need to invest where the materials are at, where the resources are at, and this is the way we're going to get there. Do you agree with that?
I fully agree. I think for me there are three topics if I look at the overall survival. I think number one, and Nicole mentioned it, from a scientific perspective, I think the world is really, we need to really protect the endangered forest. In order to reach a target by 2030, we need to have achieved that. I think that for me, considering that we are just in 2020 right now, and considering the fact that already over 50% of the viscose producers are having a green button shirt, a green shirt, shows that it is possible. It comes at an investment, but it is possible. So what I found a little bit pity is that Canopy didn't raise the bar here, and then that the vision for me is therefore not aggressive enough. Why not 2024? It is possible. We are a relative small portion of the overall industry. There are existing business models that prove that it can be done. So I would have loved to be a little bit more aggressive on the timing. That would be one of my observations of the report. That I would say, Canopy, you could have done better. The second one, then, I think, is what I just mentioned, the whole biorefinery concept. I think the way how Canopy also expresses the fact that 40% of the tree actually is used by the industry to produce fibers is completely true. But at the same time, some of the waste that is left can really be used as a very good biorefinery product that it can really help to reduce our greenhouse gases. So I think this we need to look at a holistic concept, not just at the fiber production, but the holistic concept. And I think if this could be part of the vision, I think we could address then the greenhouse gas problems at the same time as we green up the fashion fiber industry. And the third thing, I think that as a kind of a highlight, but again, I fully agree with the direction. But if you're looking now at the how, if I look at indeed initiatives like Renusa, like you mentioned, like the Orange Skin, which is extremely small, but it's a good story and it is an alternative source. We commercialized Refibra several years ago. And we have it available on a commercial scale. We can, at this moment, really provide millions of garments with fibers that contain, at this moment, up to 30% of recycled cotton to reduce the amount of wood sources. So the technology is available. Now, considering the small scale and considering partially manual process, it's more expensive. And what I just could hope for, where Canopy could really help us with, is not just putting pressure then on us as fiber producers to look for alternatives to pulp, because this is it's quite an investment if you need to look at what we might need to change in our production process and the processability of the fibers by the dyeing and finishers. So it really is a big change in the industry. But considering the fact that they have access to over 300 brands and retailers, get their commitment to buy the products that are currently already available with this kind of alternative raw materials. And that would be, for me, the third point where I said this is really where Canopy can help the industry overall create the demand, create the pool, create a commitment from the brands and retailers to pick up these new technologies and offer it to the consumers.
What do you think, Nicole?
I welcome all of that feedback. In fact, I was like, oh, I should have picked up the phone to Robert earlier on and said, Robert, what do you think about this? Because we actually felt that it was, like a totally doable plan, yet audacious, a little bit heretical, perhaps at the time. But the fact that many products that are currently made from forest don't actually need to be. They can be made with other sources of fiber, and we can produce high quality clothing with recycled clothing or packaging with agricultural residues. There is a shift that's happening. I think Robert's last point around the economy of scale of production is something that we are working on and working with. Lenzing were first to market with the Refibra, which is a fabric that's made partially with waste textiles. I think you started on the market with 20% recycled textile as part of that, and now it's up to 30%. Correct me if I'm wrong.
Oh, correct.
But I would agree that, in fact, it's bringing next generation solutions to market at scale is a little bit like a high school dance party, right? Everybody sort of has a bit of a tendency to stand around the side of the room and hope that somebody else gets onto the dance floor and makes it happen. But it's one of those things that it's not actually going to be a dance party unless everybody kind of contributes and gets in. And I think, producers have a really important role to play there. Innovators have an important role to play. We as Canopy have a really important role to play in terms of catalyzing the space, and so do brands. And so I think that is definitely an area of work that we are.
Where does the money come from, you think, the 69 billion?
Oh, so the 69 billion. For us,
not necessarily how it was estimated. I don't want you to misunderstand me.
No.
I'm just
Where
wondering.
does that money come from? Who's paying?
Yeah.
Who's going to bring that money to the table? So
Yeah.
the 69 billion that's different to the issue that I think Robert was just touching on, which is around the mobilization of capital. Right? There is a lot of money out there. There's a lot of money that's being moved and invested, and there's a lot of money that's being invested even in major infrastructure and industrial developments. And so it's really around ensuring that capital is mobilized and invested in these new technologies. Now, traditionally within the investment world, they would be seen as kind of riskier investments just because they're new to market, and some new technologies work well at a lab scale and don't necessarily navigate to that commercial scale production well. But what we see is being particularly critical is the equity piece. Our experience with working alongside next gen solutions providers that have gotten the green light and moved forward to building commercial scale facilities is that being able to unlock secure their equity helps unlock the broader debt package, which is much easier for them to secure. And so we see it potentially coming from a couple of areas. One, there's currently $5 to $6 trillion in subsidies going into what are kind of extractive industries, and obviously governments have the potential to shift some of those subsidies across to help enable greener supply chains. And then in the world of venture capital and private capital, we are currently working to sort of currently working to try and enable investment in this space. And so we're working with brand partners to develop strategic letters of interest to purchase, as well as with producers, actually, to basically try and de-risk the investment space around these new technologies, being able to secure their investment from more traditional global investment firms and venture capitalists. And so that's the work that we're doing as the next stage of operationalizing survival.
You both, well, specifically, Nicole, you mentioned governments and subsidies. I ask you both, is there anything specifically you would want to see from governments to make this easier? Robert.
Yeah, for sure. I think at this moment, one of the biggest, by the way, problems that we have in the fashion industry is just the overall amount of waste. I think that is a huge challenge. I think there are rumors going that about a third of the clothing that's being produced is never actually sold or worn. Now, so if I now take that across the portfolio, we would already significantly reduce the amount of trees required if we just produce less waste. And that waste system is something that needs to be addressed, I think, where the government can help us with. The other thing is really then we need to go to circularity. There's so much raw material, let's say, available in existing garments. So at Lenzing, we try to take a three-pillar approach. Number one is really to reduce just the amount of fibers that the industry needs overall. And here, by the way, I'm not talking about Lenzing. We're going beyond the fiber production. That I think is the responsibility we take on as a company to really work with governments and NGOs together just to reduce the amount of garments produced, to improve it, the efficiency in the whole value chain, the amount of reuse of garments through different subscription models, to maybe work with brand and retailers as a fiber producer, saying, okay, what can we do together to make longevity garments, through spun dyeing or whatever. There's a lot of technology that can be done. It's more expensive, but if the garment is being reused longer, we're improving the overall efficiency. Now, beyond those 2 points, you really need to strive for circularity. And circularity is hitting a lot of legal burdens. First of all, very often it comes in the waste is available in regions where there might be certain parts of the value chain missing to turn that waste back into a garment. What we're doing and what we see in Europe, for instance, you have all the different blends. You have a completely lack of transparency. If you're looking at a garment, you can see at this moment on the label which fibers are in there. But even if I now purchase, for instance, a 100% cotton shirt, it could be that the sewing thread is polyester, which would be a big barrier for chemical recycling, for instance. And it doesn't say anything about the chemicals that are being used for the dyes and the finishes of that garment. So that kind of transparency is really needed to drive circularity. So for me, the role of the government has to really insist on the total environmental footprint of a garment. That transparency is required, that we can trace fully back where is the material coming from, because that provides really good basis for circularity. There's going to be a lot of costs, and there's going to be a transition period required, which has to be financed. And I think there again, the leaders needs to be separated from the laggers. And that's why I think EPR schemes, is extended producer responsibility, becomes extremely important, because the only way how you can really drive a circular industry is to really make sure that 100% of the waste, or 95% of the waste of the garments that are no longer being used, actually can be brought back. And there you need to have a government infrastructure that really drives this kind of investment. And then I think the last aspect then is indeed, if you have these EPR schemes, if you pass on a certain cost penalty to the polluters, it allows governments to invest also then in the green players, in new technologies through investment supports, because companies like Lenzing, we have the technology, but we might not have the financial resources to now invest at large scale things. So that could be through investments support, it could be through tax benefits, it could be through indeed investments of a lot of the very successful startups that we see now really going into this direction. But that money needs to come from the polluters, and that only can be triggered by the government. So for me, it's a fair level playing field, because we are going to play a more regional game versus a global game. So a region needs to be protected from players that play according to different rules from other parts of the world. We need to have financial incentives and financial penalties, to really make the right decision. And we need to really urge for that transparency that is needed to drive circularity.
Well, those are the kinds of messages that resonate a lot with me. Nicole, any views on this from your end?
Yeah, I mean, I would just build on what Robert said. I think extended producer responsibility is really important. The governments can play a really important role in creating the enabling conditions, both through regulation as well as financial incentives that enable that kind of back end of these new supply chains to be built. Like we're talking, like there is currently, as there is with recycled paper, there currently isn't the same kind of infrastructure in place to be able to divert textiles out of the waste stream at scale, so that we can reach those kind of better kind of economies of scale. So that working to enable those new back end systems to be developed, I think, are also really critical. I agree in terms of the incentives for enabling these new technologies to come to market. And then also, governments have the ability to, there's a lot of countries that are buckling under the burden of debt, and debt to countries in the EU or international monetary entities and funds. And so, we need to hit really aggressive conservation targets over the course of the next decade. It could be a mechanism of debt forgiveness to enable countries to be able to actually secure their landscapes that are forest ecosystems that are still standing under conservation. They could actually move forward with conserving those landscapes rather than feeling as though they have to actually deforest it or liquidate those natural assets to be able to grow cash crops, to be able to service a debt. And so that's another area that I think governments could step into the space around.
Fascinating. That's super interesting, Nicole. Um, to wrap up, if you look towards next year, we're moving into 2021, hopefully. um, if you were to choose one thing, both of you, that you want to see happen to dramatically accelerate what you're trying to achieve, what would that be? One thing next year that would maybe open up new possibilities that haven't existed before.
From my perspective, we need to continue to really strive for strategic partnerships to drive this systemic change. Nobody can resolve this problem alone. We need to bring the leaders together. We need to listen to them. We need to have them setting the challenging targets and commitments, so that we really leave the laggards behind. And I think that to have to be that when I'm talking about strategic partnership, I'm talking about NGOs, I'm talking about the governments, I'm talking about industry leaders, multi-stakeholder initiatives. We need to get these people around the table to address this problem and to really make firm commitments, short-term commitments, to drive the change that we need. Where we're really struggling with at this moment is how do we reach the consumer? How can we educate the consumer on transparency, what is good and what is bad, who are the leaders and what are the laggards? And in order to reach these consumers, we need brands and retailers. And if they are at this moment refusing on, and I'm wearing a jeans that is $300, if I'm using this, for instance, with a Refibra fiber, the cost of that jeans is 10 dollar cents more expensive. And again, we are hardly selling this product. Then I can say the brands and retailers are not committed to really drive the change that we as an industry, NGOs, and multi-stakeholders are preparing to drive. And that, I think, is the bottleneck at this moment.
Nicole.
I mean, Canopy's model is really geared around collective action. And so that's I think, really critical that with all the activity that happens, that it needs to, and all the collaborations that are happening, for us, it's really key that we stay focused on ensuring that all of that activity actually translates through into change. I think if I'm going to pick just one thing, I would probably settle on, over the course of the next year, really working out how, on the finance side of things, to compress the timeline that it takes for the equity and the financing to be unlocked for these next generation solutions, to be able to secure the financing that's necessary to be able to build commercial scale facilities. And so working towards building, be that a strategic investment vehicle with a global investment firm, or some other kind of way of enabling the mobilization of capital. I think that'll be a big focus for us, on top of everything else that we're already have underway.
Right, I was
No
thinking,
rest for the mischievous.
Yeah.
no more surfing. Nicole and Robert, thanks a lot.
Thanks,
Thank
Mike.
you, Nicole.